Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Sub Hub podcast. I'm EmKay Sullivan.
And I'm Dani Moreno.
And today we are going to do a little bit of chat about gear that we think is important for trail running in general, but specifically for sub-ultra races as well. But first, Dani, we're like 2 weeks away from Boston Marathon. Tell me how training is going.
It's going. I'm sure anyone who's trained for a marathon, I am at the point now where I'm regaining energy. I'm kind of like starting to come out of that grindy type of lots of volume, kind of like mild to high intensity. And now we're starting to, go into this taper where the intensity's still there, but the volume's starting to decrease. And yeah, it's kind of crazy to think like from the beginning, like where I was and what I'm able to do now, like in road workouts and stuff like that. And I definitely feel like I've gained something. And yeah, I'm just excited to see what happens on the day. I'm becoming more, I definitely have a lot more confidence than I did at the beginning of the training cycle. I don't think it has been like my best training cycle ever, but it's like still something I'm like proud of and like excited to show up to the race at with. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be cool to like rep the trail community and see what I can do. And yeah. How about you? How are you feeling about canyons?
So I've been like out of the country for the last 3 weeks, which has been a little crazy. I was in Madeira for like 6 days with the craft team, doing content stuff, team camp. And it was really busy, but it was good because, as you know, living in Mammoth here in Reno, I have had the most wintry winter I've ever experienced here. And so I haven't really been able to run a lot of trails. And so just being in Madeira and actually being able to run up a hill that wasn't on a treadmill was like really nice. It was exhausting because I haven't done that in a long time, but I did that. And then I went to Korea, which also was dry and has like a solid amount of hilly trails. And so the last 3 weeks, I've just been trying to get my legs underneath me in terms of climbing. And I came back to Reno and mostly everything is dry. We're still getting some random snowstorms here and there. Well, mostly everything under like 6,000 feet is dry. Otherwise, we're not going to be touching those mountain trails for a while. But yeah, Canyons is coming up soon. It's like 4 weeks away when we're recording this. And I'm feeling kind of like you were saying, like, in the beginning, you're like, oh gosh, I'm not ready for this, but it always comes around. So I'm not really that worried. I'm just in this moment. I'm mostly scared for the workouts that Rick is going to be giving me over the next 4 weeks.
I love that. Yeah. For the listeners out there, I actually spent a few days at EmKay's house while she was in Korea because I got stuck there. I went up to get my wedding dress because I'm getting married soon. And yeah, the 395, which is how you typically get from Mammoth to Reno, is just not completely open right now. So yeah, anyways, had some traffic troubles, spent some time at EmKay's house, which was nice. Like she said, a lot of the trails have dried out a little bit lower, whereas where I'm at, it's like mostly all snow. Yeah, for the team camp, before like we get into the nitty-gritty episode, like, is it as fun as it looks? I feel like everyone is having these team camps. I had my own, but I'd love to hear like your experience. Like, how fun was it, or is it all smoke and mirrors?
So it was really fun to meet the team because I've only met I've been on the craft team for 2.5 years now. And I've only met like a handful of the athletes. And so to meet the rest of the team was a lot of fun. And the running that we did get to do was fun, but it was so busy. Like team camp, I think, is a little bit of smoke and mirrors just because you are like the brand's trying to get content all at once because they have everybody in one place. And so it was definitely busy. I was exhausted by the end, but fortunately I have some really fun teammates who, we'd come back from like the content portion. We'd be like, okay, everybody eat lunch, stuff your faces, and then we're going to go find something really fun and like run up a mountain real quick. And then we'll be back for dinner. So it was kind of nonstop, but how was your guys' team camp at Black Canyons?
Yeah, it was a blast. That was my first team camp. I don't know about you.
Yeah, same.
Since like basically college. And yeah, it's something I just have been very interested to see, you know, being a professional and what that team camp looks like. Ours actually, like the media was more about the canyon, like Black Canyons. So I think we had a little bit of like saving grace in that we had a lot more downtime. And it was very like slow day to day, but like, I don't blame craft or any brand that takes advantage of all their global athletes being in one place and being like, we're just going to get content for the rest of the year. But yeah, I just found myself, I loved like the in-between conversations because we all talk to each other and stuff, but like our day to day is mostly we're like out on our own. And you just like, when you get a chance to talk to your teammates and you're like, whoa, we're literally all doing the same thing around the world, like trying to pursue this niche sport and stuff like that, I think was just very cool and like grounding for sure.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but everybody on the team does something like a little bit different.
Yeah.
In terms of like their specialty. And so, yeah, like listening to the way that people train, like what their approach to things are, and then also just like running with them. It was just really interesting, like getting to know everybody's little niche in this trail running world.
Totally. Yeah, that's such a good point. Because in college, it's like you're all running the same distance, like when you're training and stuff like that. But then you go to camp and you're running with like Tim Tolson and Ida, right? And they're running like 100K, 100-mile distances. And then you're obviously doing like sub ultra stuff. Yeah, that's really funny. I had a similar experience and just hearing people's goals, you know, and like what they think is possible in different courses. And I was like, whoa, you're super stoked about potentially breaking like 16 hours. That's
that sounds like a nightmare to me.
That sounds like a nightmare to me right now. But it's like very inspiring. I was like, dang, I'm trying to focus on breaking 6 hours over here. And I think that's big deal. But yeah, no, that's really cool. And I might be at Canyons too at the 25K. 90% sure right now. Just depends on how I feel after Boston and stuff.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll see you there in person since you've been at my house recently and I was not here. We're just flying past each other, but I'm so stoked for you at Boston. This is Dani's first marathon, for those who don't know, road marathon. And it's just a totally different experience. And I can attest that every time I start a road training block, like whether it be a half marathon or marathon, I'm always like, I am not good enough for this. Like I'm not fast anymore. And then like 3 weeks in, I'm, running pace and it's like, oh, I can still do this. It's buried down in there under my trail legs. But by the end of the, block, you're like, oh, I could run this pace for a marathon. No biggie.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of strength. There's so much strength from the trails.
Yes. Yeah. And it translates very well to the marathon. You just got to have a couple weeks of like actually running pace.
Yeah.
And it feeling not like you're a baby deer.
Yeah. No, totally. Cool. All right. Shall we dive into this?
Yeah. We had some people in the Slack group on Freetrail, as well as some people on Instagram asking us to do an episode on gear and just like things that we think that newbies might need to know getting into the sport. So we'll go over a couple different things. And then at the end, I think we might even go over some mandatory gear lists that we've encountered, just so you guys kind of have an idea of what some races may look like.
Yeah.
Do you want to get us started off with some shoes, Dani?
Totally. Yeah. And we say newbies to the sport because we would think more times than not, like with sub ultra races, people tend to do the shorter races first. So yeah, shoes is very personal. And so we're a couple components, we'll just dive right into it, that I found have been particularly important to me as I look at sub ultra races is the tread of the shoes. Typically, like in sub ultra races, you're running 2 to 6 hours and you're running a faster clip. And so I find that tread is really important depending on the type of terrain of race that you're doing. Obviously, you look at something like in California, like SoCal trails, those are pretty buttery in the big scheme of things. And you could probably get away with road shoes. which is great. And you don't need to invest in a pair of trail shoes. But if you want to start getting into more like mountainous terrain, I would highly suggest that you invest in a good pair of trail shoes where the tread gives you enough confidence that as you're navigating the terrain, you just like, you feel more safe and more confident, especially like on the downhills. So for me, I found I like really aggressive tread, but not huge lugs. I actually have personally tripped with like really big lugs. And I choose being like light and nimble over overly aggressive tread. And then, yeah, what else do you want to say about tread?
I prefer pretty aggressive tread as well, but I kind of like you, if the lugs are too thick, I will trip and fall. So I like lots of lugs on the shoes. So the more surface that's covered in like little lugs to me works better than like a couple of like super thick ones. And yeah, specifically for downhills, especially if it's a trail that's like, even on some buttery trails, if you have like a really smooth trail with some gravel on the top and you're running downhill, that can be like pretty sketchy with a pair of like road shoes specifically. So yeah, I think that tread is something that you should definitely be focused on, but it is also going to be kind of like a person to person preference.
Yeah. And so like when we say lugs, it's kind of like you think of like soccer cleats and like the teeth. I think of like teeth of the shoe. And
Yeah.
so for example, just because this one stands out to me is like the Hoka Jaws. Like I tried that out a couple times. This is a shoe that you probably have seen Joe Gray running a bunch of times. And he does a lot of like uphill racing, which I could see why he chooses that shoe. And I'm not picking on Joe or anything, but like for me personally, like it's just like a lot of underneath. So you're like really having to get like your feet a bit higher to get the full benefit of that type of tread, where something more like, I know a lot of people like the Speed Goat. And I'm just saying Hoka just based off what I see people wearing and stuff like that. Like that has a much less aggressive tread, but there's tread still there and there's a lot of it. Like EmKay said, it's not just like 8 pieces. It's like fully covered in that grippy kind of material.
Yeah. And I think a big thing, like a new thing in the trail world right now that maybe we should talk about, because I think we've both raced in carbon trail shoes now. And I personally, I have like a bad ankle. And so for me, wearing carbon just accentuates my weaknesses on the trails. Like on the roads, I'm all for a carbon shoe. It makes me feel fast. There's nothing that I'm going to roll my ankle on, but like if I roll my ankle in a carbon shoe, it feels like I'm getting shot off the earth. So for me personally, I'm not a fan of carbon for trails. I don't know how you felt racing in a carbon shoe on trails, Dani, but I know you tried it a couple of times last year.
Yeah, I did. I feel the same. And I found that with the carbon shoes, for whatever reason, like the tread just got beat up a lot quicker. And so I just felt like the shoe didn't last me very long, which I was super bummed about. And so I just personally didn't want to keep promoting that when I have endless, somewhat endless, access to shoes. And so, yeah, then I ended up switching it up to like a lower profile with a little bit more tread. But yeah, the downhills suddenly, like I found myself being a bit more timid, and I like to be aggressive on downhills when I was wearing the carbon shoes for that same reason. And the stack height is like a little bit higher too. So if you roll your ankle, it just like it really banana boats you. Like it really, you feel it a little bit more unless you like have crazy rock hard ankles.
Which good for you.
Yeah, good for you. I'm really jealous. You should totally wear the carbon shoes.
Yeah. Because I think they probably have like their benefits, and especially if you're running like trails on the West Coast that are like pretty buttery. I know people for way too cool run in like alpha flies and stuff. But I just, they're not for me. But I think part of that, kind of like you were talking about with the carbon stack height is usually a little taller. is that for me, the base of a trail shoe needs to be like pretty consistent. So if the forefoot of the shoe and the heel of the shoe are wide, but the middle of the shoe is narrow, I'm much more likely to roll my ankle. Whereas if the middle of the shoe is just as wide as the front and the back, I feel much more stable in that shoe. And so that's something that's important for me in a trail shoe specifically, is that the width of the shoe is consistent all the way through if it's going to be really wide and a higher stack.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I will say too, like, so with the stack height and everything, like on the lines of that is always like the weight of the shoe too. And there's different brands with different stack heights and different weights. But again, for me, like I just have found personally, the lighter the shoe, the better for me. I just like being able to pick up my legs quick and stuff like that. And the downside to that is like, you definitely have to have the strength to counteract the pounding that, maybe something with a thicker sole is going to save, that energy deficit that you're going to go into. And so just being like sure that you're practicing in those shoes and like you're ready for that, especially if your race has like multiple downhills or like really steep downhills.
I was muted. Do you have a preference when it comes to like lacing? I've never really noticed that as an issue, but I know that some people are bothered by certain positioning.
Yeah. So I have tried some with like the boa and stuff. And I don't know, maybe I'm just like a traditionalist, but I just find myself gravitated to the lacing. And I will say, there's some lacing, like laces that I have to lace 3 times versus 1 time. And so knowing, this is going to get really into it, but like there's like the flat lacing, and then there's more of like the tube lacing. And then there's some shoes with really long laces or short laces. And so going back to like in practice, what do you do? And like figuring those things out for the overall shoe that you're going to like the best. But for me, I would say too that like I just also lace my shoes overly tight because to me, I rather it feel a little snug than my shoe come untied during like a downhill or something, which has happened before. It's almost like the most terrifying thing is, you're bombing a downhill and your shoe comes untied. And I'm saying this because I'm like fighting for points in these situations. And I'm like, I have no time to stop and tie my shoe. Maybe elsewise I would. But yeah, I don't know if that really answered the question, but I guess just like providing context for people that like there's different types of lacing systems and like figure out what works for you. I'm more of a traditionalist. I like shoelaces.
Yeah. And different shoes also have their laces placed in different spots. So some people don't like to have their laces like right on top of their foot, especially for like steep uphills or steep downhills when you're putting a lot of pressure on your feet. That can cause some irritation. So a lot of brands have kind of gone towards a lacing system that kind of goes like diagonally down the shoe, not quite diagonally. I don't know if that's the right description, but if you're somebody that has like issues with the top of your feet, looking into a lacing system that kind of takes the pressure off and kind of goes towards the outside of your foot might be a little better as well.
Yeah. And also too, those are all really good points, is like with sub ultras, in theory, you're pounding a little bit harder and you're not out there as long as an ultra. And so I know there's some issues that some people will come in contact with when they're out there for 10 hours that you're just not going to face in a sub ultra. And so, yeah, kind of mitigating for what can you run into in a sub ultra. I think mostly it's downhill, your foot like sliding, getting blisters from that. For me also, like having flex in the shoe for like quick steep uphills. That was also another thing with carbon shoes that I found, is like they don't flex as much. And so you find yourself kind of utilizing your hamstring a bit more. At least that's like what happened to me, versus like being able to like engage my calf as well as I'd like to on steeper uphills. So having kind of like that flex in the forefoot is important to me in shoes too.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I ran an uphill race in carbon shoes and I was like, this mostly feels good, but like I don't feel like I can really get my calves going.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of other points on shoe types, one being like the drain ability of the shoe. A lot of courses you'll encounter like creek crossings and stuff. And some people, they like find their little rocks and move over the creek like that. But if I'm in a race, I'm just running straight through it. Like we're going through it. We're hoping that our shoes drain pretty well and dry pretty well. And part of that's also, I think, socks, which could be a totally different conversation, but like having socks that dry pretty quickly and shoes that drain well, I think are super important for a lot of trail races, especially spring trail races when things are starting to melt.
Yeah, 100%. Because you'll see a lot of shoes that have like Gore-Tex, like, and the brands will typically like highlight that, like, this is a Gore-Tex version of this blah, blah, blah. And this is just the normal version. And so what that Gore-Tex does is like, it does keep things out. But if you're going, knee deep into water and the water gets in, it also means nothing can go out from the shoe. Like nothing could get in, but nothing could get out. And so it could be like pretty uncomfortable. But if you're running, in the winter and you're mostly just going through like mud and there's minimal water and you want your feet to be warm, then it's a great choice to have that kind of extra layer of protection.
Yeah, because I've also found that like Gore-Tex shoes can be kind of warm, like if it's not wintertime. Anything that's like waterproof. I ran a race. I think I ran Broken Arrow in a pair of Gore-Tex shoes. And I was like, my feet are so sweaty. I am so hot. I cannot cool off. So definitely a seasonal thing, that Gore-Tex.
Yeah, 100%. And then if you're looking on the vein of winter running, like if you are running in the winter or you live in a cold place and you're racing in the winter as well, I personally have found that I like using Yak Tracks. There's some shoes that allow you to actually like, you could pretty much put micro spikes into any shoe, but there's some shoes that have the ability where it's kind of like built in already and you could drill into those spots and put micro spikes in. But yeah, I just personally I don't race in the snow. I just run on the snow. So I found that if I need that extra grip, I do that. I'd say snow, but mostly ice probably. What about you?
Yeah, I've never raced in the winter, so I don't really know for racing. But I use spikes mostly, but I try to pretty much only run on the snow if it's like almost ice or like really packed down, because I find that running in the snow just makes me really sore. But I prefer spikes to Yak Tracks most of the time.
Yeah, no, I would say so. Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'm opposite of you.
Opposite, definitely. Yeah. Well, and also too, because sometimes I'll get people asking, like, how do you run in the winter? How do you run in the snow and stuff like that? And yeah, I would say if you are going to be running in the snow like one time a year, less than 10 times a year, maybe go with the Yak Tracks. But like EmKay lives in a cold place. If you're somewhere in Europe that's cold, or North America, like North America, then yeah, micro spikes, just having them already there and having it lighter so your foot can kind of get picked up a little bit quicker and faster would be nice.
And I don't know how accurate this is, but like maybe spikes are better for icy conditions and Yak Tracks might be better for like actual like snowy conditions. Because the spikes are really good on ice. Like you could run down a straight, ice waterfall and not slip once, which is why I like them. But we are really sunny here in Reno. So when it snows, if people are walking on it, it ices really quickly. So Yak Tracks don't really make sense in my situation that much.
Yeah, no, definitely. Whereas like I tend to just run on the snow as weird as that sounds. And so like I just already want that teeth just in there. But even that, I would say I mostly am just in trail shoes because it gets pretty warm here too.
Yeah.
But I can't speak for anyone who's like in -20 all the time, where I think they would probably have an opinion as well. Okay, cool. So we've talked about tread, lacing. Like we talked about lacing, we talked about Gore-Tex. What's like what's a shoe in craft right now that you would recommend? And for listeners out there, obviously this is biased. EmKay is with Craft. I'm with Adidas. So we'll each share like a shoe that we like for sub ultra, and then just like take that with a grain of salt or take it with a huge something. I don't know what the opposite of that would be. And then like figure out what brand works for you.
Yeah. My shoe that I run or train and race in right now is the Pro Endurance Trail. I've been running in it for a while, but they just came out for the public. And I really like it because it has the smaller tread that's kind of everywhere. The base width is wide enough that I feel comfortable like sending it on kind of more technical trails. And so far, anytime I've run through a creek in them, my feet dry pretty quickly. And so for me, like those three things are, and they have a lot of cushion. So my feet typically don't like hurt during a race because I have enough cushion to like make it through.
Nice.
What about you? What's your Adidas go-to?
My Adidas go-to is the Speed Ultra. I would say probably 90% of my team, that's kind of their go-to, at least for the people who are running shorter races. The athletes that are running longer have their whole group of shoes that they like as well. But it's pretty light shoe, but same with you, like it has a pretty, like the tread has a lot of tread, but it's not like really toothy. It doesn't have like huge lugs. It's honestly kind of like a bike tire, which I really like. And it's made out of Continental material, or it's by Continental, which I think is also like car tire stuff. But yeah, and they also drain, which I really like. They're porous. So if it's cold outside, I just wear extra thick socks. But otherwise, like they're good to go.
Yeah, there's nothing like running a race in a shoe that doesn't drain.
Oh, yeah. And then
blisters, soggy.
Yeah, not about that. Your feet are just so raw after.
Yeah, I have done that before and it was miserable.
Yeah. All right. Shall we move to clothing / layers?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know. We're not going to go like too deep into clothes because I mean, you guys know the basics. You know, you need your shorts, you need your shirts, your tights, your long sleeves. But I would say mostly in terms of a race. For me, the things that I find most important are a comfortable pair of shorts, whether that's for me, I prefer to race in split shorts, but some people prefer to race in like kind of like half tight type shorts, a tank top or a crop top, and a windproof jacket, like a light windproof jacket that you can easily take out of your pack and throw on if you get up above a certain altitude and all of a sudden it's freezing or windy. What about you, Dani?
Yeah, I would say it definitely depends on the race for sure. But I would say most of the time, if it's like good weather, I'm in some sort of, it's not exactly a split short, but it's kind of like a looser short. I just found like with spandex that like between like the eating and the drinking and just like dirt somehow getting kicked up on you, that like my spandex would just get a little grimy when I would wear them. And it would just like, yeah. And with the gels like starting to like stick in weird places. That might be too much information for weird people, but for people, but like I'm mostly on my legs. Like when I was power hiking, like the spandex like would just, it'd get weird. So yeah, I like a looser short. I like if the short has like pockets of some sort, because I like to stash my wrappers in there. And then I'm a big fan of like the looser tank top. I'll wear crops for like shorter races. But yeah, I just even in college and high school, I was always about like the looser tank tops. And I'm trying to think, definitely a lighter jacket. I also really like arm sleeves. when it's colder, just because they're easy to like pull down once you get hot. And then, and then, um, yeah, socks. And then I guess we could talk about like colder gear if you want.
Yeah, I was going to go back to the spandex real quick because
Yeah.
something that I find with spandex, at least in trail races, is once I start to get sweaty and then it dries and I get salty, having a seam that's on the inside of my thigh that actually like touches my skin, like I am going to chafe so bad that I bleed, like no doubt. So with the split short, like usually there's not a seam. So when I start to get like salty, it's not rubbing my thighs. So that's like one of the main reasons that I prefer split shorts. But if you don't have that problem and you like spandex, like go for
Totally.
it, you know?
Yeah. No, 100%. And they have like you said, they have like longer spandex, which I know people like.
Yeah.
And even with like the split shorts, like there's longer versions of those, like 5-inch, 7-inch now too, which is really nice.
Yeah. And or like you could go straight to the Courtney DeWalter link too, if that's like cover your whole legs.
Yeah.
It might be whatever's comfortable for you. But colder weather races, honestly, I haven't run many races where I haven't like just started in shorts and a tank top and maybe arm sleeves. My Tommy actually told me this morning because I was being a little wimp, but like my phrase is kind of be bold, start cold. And so like, you know, I'll warm up in a pair of tights or like a pair of pants and a jacket, sometimes even a puppy jacket to get really warm. But like when it's time to get on the start line, like I get once if I'm too hot, like I'm just going to be so miserable. So I'm somebody who just wears the least amount of clothing that I can get away with as soon as the race starts.
Wow, we are such opposite. Yeah, so that's one take, which is EmKay's take. And then I prefer to be as warm as possible, as long as possible. So I'll like arm sleeves, headbands, like an extra layer, jackets, whatever I can get away with and that I can like easily stow away is usually what I'll go with. And there's even been a couple races that I wear tights because I'm just like, I rather be too hot than too cold, which is really, yeah, it's literally the opposite of EmKay. Yeah. But with that being said, like I also just thrive in really hot races. Like the hotter, the better for me. So maybe that's just like, I don't know what I'm just a hot person and you just like to be cold.
Yeah. I'm somebody who I have a hard time even wearing gloves like in the dead of winter because like if my hands are too hot, I'm so uncomfortable. So just, you know, figure out what kind of person you are. Are you an EmKay or are you Dani?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I have tried to run a race in tights before and it was like cold, but not like cold enough. And I was so miserable for the whole race.
Well, I will say too, for this specific audience, obviously with sub ultra too, like you're not out there as long. So definitely take that into consideration if, you know, depending on the length of the race, you're out there 2, maybe 4 hours. So if you think you're going to be out there for like 2-3 hours, then yeah, even if you're like me, I would probably, you know, strip down, just have shorts and my tank top and go for it. But if I'm running something like OCC and there's a storm coming in, I'm definitely going to like layer up as much as possible and like shed those in case like it stays cold or something like that.
Yeah, definitely just check the weather for like every hour that you think that you're going to be out there. And this may be totally off topic as well, but check the humidity because something that I ran into at Mont Blanc Marathon last year that I just was not prepared for was the humidity. And so it wasn't really that hot per se until later in the race, but I was sweating way more than I thought that I was going to sweat. And like that drained me. Whereas I think you like did your research and you were like super prepared for that. And so we can also cover that when we talk about hydration packs as well, but just being ready for the temperature and the humidity when it comes to clothes or your hydration, whatever you choose, belt or vest is very important, even in these shorter races.
Yeah. And something like Pikes Peak Ascent, right? Like the higher you go, like you might be in town and it feels warm, but the higher altitude you go, the colder it's going to be. And so, while some people that's a shorter race, for other people it's like, 4, 5, 6 hour race, you might get colder as you get up. And so having that layer ready to go with you is important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that. At the top of Pikes Peak, I was freezing. Like as soon as I stopped running, like I was so hot while I was running. As soon as I stopped, I was like, I'm going to die up here. Fortunately, I did a drop bag and I put like all of my puffy gear in there. So I was prepared, but yeah. So kind of along the same lines, race clothes would be headwear. Dani was kind of talking about how if it's even slightly cold, she just goes in already with a headband on. I don't normally wear headbands, but I am a big hat gal. And so I'm pretty much in any trail race wearing a hat. Like I chose not to wear a hat during a road race recently. Such a mistake. I am so used to a hat now that I'm obsessed. So most of it for me is that it keeps me from getting sweat in my eyes. And also it keeps me from squinting. And I find that if I'm squinting during a race, like I'm not as relaxed as I could be. And it might be something really small, but I just feel like even just your facial expressions, like if you're tired and you're squinting, like you're telling your body that you're not relaxed. And so that's why I wear a hat. Dani, you're a visor gal. Tell us about it.
I just love looking super stylish out there. Not many people rock the visor. No. I'm exactly the same way. My eyes are actually really sensitive. They always have been when I was younger. And I just find that I can see better when I have a visor on. And like for me, psychologically, it makes me feel cooler that like my head is covered. Maybe there's actual science. I'm sure there is. But yeah, I just feel cooler. And I like visors and hats because if say it's a really warm race and it's warming up, it's really easy to like take that off and just like, put it in a creek crossing or a river or whatever water source you have and just like throw it back on your head. And again, just like psychologically, I find that it helps me a lot.
And when you say cool, you mean temperature wise, yeah. I mean, it also looks cool.
It also looks really cool when you're putting water on. And then for me also, like I have really thick hair. And so I tried hats before. But for me personally, like my ponytail in the hat would kind of like drag my hat down and I'd find myself like pulling the brim down a lot. Whereas with the visor, I can just like tie a higher pony. And even if the ponytail like starts to droop during the race, like I still have that like same level of coverage on my eyes.
Yeah. For me, I have like kind of a mullet situation going on. So I have to wear a full hat because my hair doesn't like all go into a ponytail anymore. But the way that I feel like you have to wear your hair specifically as a woman, like under, like you were saying, when your hair gets heavy and you have it in the ponytail hole, like it pulls on the hat and kind of makes it stick up instead of being in front of your eyes. But I also find that I have to wear my ponytail or my bun below the hat so that if I'm hiking, sometimes the hat can be kind of in the way of my visibility. And so I can easily take the hat off and put it on backwards if my hair is below the hat instead of in the hat hole. So kind of weird, small things, but something to consider if you like to move your hat around or take it off to get it wet. Either wear a visor or put your hair a little bit lower so that you can easily move the hat around.
Yeah. Great tip for anyone with hair or long hair.
Yeah, I said for women, but guys have long hair too.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I'm trying to think I don't think there's any other headwear I really go with.
I like the bucket hat.
I was about to say, yeah, I train a lot in a bucket hat. I have yet to race in a bucket hat, more so because at least where I am in the field of sub ultra, like we're just moving so fast that like this is specifically like just what I've experienced in training is just like the wind kind of like pulls on the bucket hat a little bit. And I just find myself having to like tighten it when I'm like really aggressively going down a downhill where, 90% of my training, I could get away with running with a bucket hat because I'm not trying to like run race pace. But again, it depends like why you're out there and how long you're going to be out there. And, if you feel like you may not run into that same situation, like I 100% recommend the bucket hat for the same reason. Like you get the sun coverage, you can dunk it a lot in water, which is really nice, like a bucket float on your head. And then when it comes down to the hair, I find like, again, the lower ponytail is really nice for that. I mean, it's really the only option with the bucket hat.
Yeah. And I think the bucket hat is probably more beneficial, at least in our world, for just like long days in the mountains when you're trying not to get just totally wrecked by the sun.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine like racing with that cinch up on my neck. Like I would just be so claustrophobic.
Yeah. David, who's with the Golden Trail, he's one of the announcers. He's like, why haven't you rocked the bucket hat in a race yet? And I was like, David, have you tried racing a bucket hat?
It just flapped all the way up.
It would just flap all the way up. Yeah. Cannot imagine that. Not yet.
Yeah. That's for the longer stuff.
Yeah. All right. So we have your shoes, we have what you're wearing. Now, how are you going to carry your water and snacks?
We love snacks.
We love snacks.
This is a loaded one, I feel like.
Yeah, this could get really tons of hot takes and get really controversial. Not as controversial as the bucket versus visor versus regular hat, but very close.
Nothing more controversial than that. I'm going to let you start this one.
Okay. So hydration. There's kind of three categories in my head. As the main ones is you either go with the vest, a belt, or a handheld. Those are kind of the ones that stick out to me.
Yeah.
So handhelds, usually it's something where like you slip it onto your hand and it's about the same amount of water. It probably ranges from like 8 to 12, maybe. I've seen some pretty big handhelds. Ounces of water. And then sometimes like it's just the bottle and like some way to link it to your hand. So it's easy. Back in the day, they used to use like bike tire tubes or something like that. Which that's super old school if you want to go that way. And then some of them have like a little pocket that you could put stuff in, right? So that's the handheld. And traditionally you'll like, it's either one or sometimes you'll see people with two. So there's that. Then you have the belt. And there is quite an array of belt. There's like belts that you can buckle, where the hydration is kind of like in the back with like a pocket. And sometimes you'll have like two little ones that are plastic. You could have one that's kind of like laying horizontal, and that could be like plastic or like more of the flexible flask. Yeah, the flask. There's some that are just like one big bottle and one big pocket. And then there's kind of like the very like close to body one, where there's not really like, it's kind of just like one giant pocket all the way around, is like some of the main types of belts. And then the vest is I would say the most common one is there's two flask or two bottles in front. And there's some that have kind of like a ribbon kind of, cinching system where you like hook it onto a little hook on one side. There's kind of like ones with zippers. I can't think of the name of, there's a couple ones.
Naked makes zippers.
Naked makes zippers. Yeah. And then
buckles.
There's buckles. Yeah. Like little buckles. And then there's also some where, it's kind of like, I honestly, I think a Camelback, because that's like what we grew up with, where it has like the bigger pouch of water in the back. And there's like a tube that comes to the front, and that obviously will carry the most water. But it's also more difficult to get water into it. So those are your options. With sub ultras, you probably will see all of them actually. Yeah, I was
gonna say, you should probably own all of them.
You should probably own all of them. But it's kind of wild because some of these races are so short that some people won't even take water. Like they'll just take water from the tables, or they'll just like carry one and then kind of like throw it to somebody that they know at some point or something like that. And so the way that I decide what I am going to take, I feel like that's the easiest way to put this, is how many aid stations there are if you can receive aid, the time that I'm going to be out there, and the weather. So aid stations first. And we could go back and forth on this, is like, there's some races that there's an aid station every 30 minutes. Yeah. And there's other races where there should be at least one aid station, but maybe you never see it. Let's just say like there could be no aid stations. And so knowing like if there's going to be an aid station or not, I think is something that's really important.
Yeah. My first experience with a race, because I feel like most of the races in the US like are more on the line of like having almost too many aid stations, which isn't a bad thing. But Mont Blanc Marathon last year was my first experience with just like not enough aid stations, or at least I wasn't like prepared for how little there was. And so in my head, I was like, oh, 3 aid stations over a marathon, like that's totally chill. But I mean, it took me 4.5 hours. So I was getting an aid station every like 90 minutes. And I was like, oh, I'll just carry one bottle and I'll fill it at the aid stations and it'll be totally fine. And I just had my waist belt. And I also, that was the day that I didn't realize how humid it was going to be. And so by the time I got to the second aid station, I was like, yeah, I'm going to die today. Like, I have not had enough water. I don't know how I'm going to catch up. Like, I don't think I started feeling good again in terms of like being semi-hydrated until the last aid station, which was 6 or 7 miles from the finish. And like at that point, you're done with all the climbing. So if you felt bad for all that, you know, you're done. So yeah, it definitely depends on how many aid stations there are going to be. Make sure you carry enough. Because I learned that lesson the hard way. And then I probably carried too much stuff like the rest of the season because I was like, I don't want this to ever happen to me again.
I feel like that's a really important lesson to learn though, because I learned that too, like when I first started trail running, and I'll never forget it. It was like, it's like the Juniper, something like steeplechase in Utah. And that year it was the La Sportiva Mountain Cup final. And I didn't know what I was doing, like, you know, series wise and stuff, but I showed up to this race because I had gotten like a ticket like you get for some series today. And to me, it's very similar. I was like, oh, this is 28K. Like, I don't need anything. But I think there was only one aid station, maybe 2. But the race is also at altitude and it was quite warm. So I had like 1 bottle of water to start, and I like drank all of it. And then I saw the aid station. I was like, I don't need that. And then basically like 10 minutes after that aid station, I just cramped for like the whole last 10K and like barely held on to my place. But I just was in so much pain where I was like, I'm going to die out here. Like somebody's going to need to rescue me. And I was like, okay, like this hydration thing is important. And like, I should have utilized that one aid station and like known that there was only going to be that one aid station. So when it comes to aid stations, like you should look at how many there are and like take a guess as to how long it's going to take you to get to each one of those, is basically what we're saying. Is like, for some people, like getting from aid station 1 to aid station 2 might take 30 minutes. Other people, it might take them an hour. And so if you're a person who drinks a lot of water and you think you're going to be, you know, in between aid stations, like an hour of racing, then plan for that and make sure that you either like fill up at that aid station or already have water like from the start. And so that's where these different hydration systems start to come into play.
Yeah. And I'm sure that we'll both have maybe some different, I'm sure a lot of our ideas behind it are pretty similar, but I would say after this last season, my kind of rundown for like what I use when would be like anything under 2 hours. I'm just going to take a handheld and probably just like rely on aid stations. Unless it's a lot of hiking. If it's a lot of hiking, I hate having a handheld in my hand because you're trying to do hands-on quads and you have this stupid little water bottle and you can't figure out if you want to put it in your sports bra or in your pants or whatever. So in that case, I would have a waist belt. And so then I would probably do waist belt like from a race that's like 2 to 4 hours, depending on the race. If it's hot, I'm probably going to a pack for anything over 3 hours. And then, definitely pack for anything over 4 hours, just because at that point, for me, the amount of like goos alone that you have to like fit into areas, like I just need more space than what's available in a waist pack, because I hate the hula hoop experience where you feel like you're having to run with your arms like in your chest because your pack is, or your waist belt is just so full. What's your general like guideline for what you take?
I just like my visual of the hula hoop is great in my head right now. It is. It's a hula hoop. You're just like bouncing and your stuff is everywhere. And then I don't know, as the race goes on, I get more tired. I'm like, wait, is that my water or gel on that side? Wait, what did I put? Oh my gosh, that's a wrapper. Like, oh my gosh, I'm out of gels. Like it just starts to get really chaotic as the race goes on. For me, I am not a big handheld person. I just like don't like carrying stuff in my hands. And yeah, I would say it's very like 50-50 because I've heard athletes on the Golden Trail, just like chatting about it where like they will do a handheld at all costs until they need to carry more mandatory gear. Like that's their thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the same with a belt, like they will die wearing a belt. That's all to say I am very big vest person. Like if I need anything more than like a couple of waters, I'll rock a vest. And the reason being is I just like I'd rather have too much than too little, because very early on in my trail career, I had a handful of races where I had too little. And just like being in that maybe 3 or 4 times before I learned the lesson, I was just like, you know what? A lot of it is like, I drink a lot of water and I eat a lot. And that's just like how my metabolism works. And like, it is what it is. Like that's my body's physiology, but I just need to carry a lot of stuff. And so the vest is like the best way to do that. With that being said, like I think Flagstaff last year, I had a belt because it was like barely 2 hours and they had different aid stations where they were handing us stuff. So I didn't have to carry a lot in my belt from like start to finish. It was a lot of like drop a bottle off, grab a bottle. So that's when I'm pro belt is like I only have to carry like one thing. Same with Sears Now, it was a lot of like F1 type of stuff. And this is for the elites in this situation where they help us with this. But like, you're able to throw a bottle, grab a bottle, throw a bottle, grab a bottle. But yeah, otherwise you will always see me with the vest. Cons of the vest is like you're wearing something. And so if it's going to be hot, plan for that. You kind of have more on your core and you want to keep your core cooler. So you need to have like other types of cooling methods ready to go in your back pocket. There's certain things that like you really hope you don't want to ever use, but like if you need to, you're probably going to have to reach back into your vest and like, gosh forbid it adds like 2 minutes, but just something to consider, like jackets and stuff like that. And yeah, you just got to really find a vest that works for you. I've worn a lot of really crappy vests that like bounce a lot and stuff like that. The last few years, I was lucky enough to have really good vests. The ones that I'm wearing right now are really good and just making sure that they're super snug. So that when you're going like up and down, the bounce is just like, I would say the main con that comes with people's vest experience. So that comes with like finding a vest that works for you.
Yeah. And I know a lot of brands have like female specific vests these days, but I would say that we're still probably a bit behind in terms of like good vests for women over men. And so finding a vest that doesn't bounce as a woman is like really, I think, harder. But my biggest problem with vests, and I've just learned to deal with it at this point in my life, is that I chafe really bad on my neck. My skin is really dry. And so if you're somebody who chafes pretty easily, like myself, just make sure that you like have practiced with your vest before race day, because if you're not used to that, like rubbing on race day, it's gonna be so miserable. But yeah. I definitely learned the hard way. And I learned a lot from Dani last year about like, always just take a little bit more if you can. Like a lot of people are so big on like, oh, I don't want to have this much water because it weighs this much. It's almost like biking in that way. I don't know if you hear that from people, but I'm just like, like, what is an extra like 20 ounces of water if I feel better later? And so, yeah, just eat more, drink more, carry more. And even like with Sears and all last year, like I had people handing, me water bottles, but I was kind of stressing about it in a way that I was like, what if I get to that aid station and my water bottle is just like not there? Or so I still carried a water bottle just in case anything like happened, because I didn't want to be stuck without water that far into a race, or, my calories. And so I would say, yeah, vest. I've gotten more into the vest ever since Marathon du Mont Blanc last year, because I just like the waist belt was not it for that race specifically.
Yeah.
When it comes to belts, I had a really terrible experience at Way Too Cool last year. I had like this Nathan belt that I was using, and I had a water bottle in it because Way Too Cool has really good aid stations. So I was going to try to carry as little as possible. And first mile, my water bottle just flies right out of the belt. And I was like, so I had to stop and pick it up, and I kept putting it back in, and it kept falling out. And so then I literally just like held this water bottle that didn't have a hand thing on it for the entire race. And I was so frustrated because without the weight in the back from the water bottle, my gels were falling out of the front. And it was so frustrating. So after that, I went on Instagram and was like, what do people wear on their waist? Because this is not happening ever again. And for me, in terms of waist belts, like Naked is by and far my favorite. It's really tight. So if you don't like tight things around your waist, it's not going to work very well for you, but it's got like, it's basically 3 big pockets. You can fit a soft flask in the back. You can fit all your gels in the front. If I'm not carrying a lot of stuff, it's really helpful. And it doesn't bounce. I have not had any issues with bounce on that one or losing things out of the pockets.
Oh yeah. Garage sale with hydration belts. That's definitely happened to me before too. And like, I've heard great things about Naked as well. Lots of, go hard fans over there. Also with the belts is like, going back to like female vests and stuff. I think it's the same with belts, because like women have like a little bit more hip and curves in those areas. And so when I have rocked belts, I've found that like wearing the belt actually higher than I think, and like making sure that my short is under the belt, so it's not just like straight on my skin, help to keep it like a little bit more secure. Whereas I felt like when I first started trailing, I was sizing my belts to be like at my hip bones, and like it would just always slide up, like especially when you're running like downhill. So when you're looking at sizing, like I would definitely look more at your waist, like right at your belly button, than versus like lower on the hips.
Yeah, because it's just gonna slide up as you go.
Yeah.
If you're a guy, we don't really know. It could be different. You may just wear it around your waist and it doesn't move. But yeah, if I ever try to wear it around my hips, it's immediately just like up to my belly button. So I don't know. Do we have anything else on belts?
I guess just like a couple tips I've learned with vests is I like if you could find vests where there's like cinching in the back. I find those are really great at no bounce. If you are a victim of the sloshing sound with water, the key there is to just like take a little bit of the air out of the part where I always want to call it like the nip, like
the nozzle,
the nozzle of the flask, just right before you start, after you fill it up with water, just like drinking a little bit and getting the air out will get that sloshing sound. The same with like, if you have the water in the back, like taking the air out and everything. And yeah, I think we covered everything. I think number one, is there aid stations? How long is it going to take you to get between those aid stations, and then go from there and plan accordingly?
Yeah. How hot is it going to be, and how exposed is the race?
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess one last note there then is like whether that can affect your hydration methods. Heat and altitude for sure, I think, are like the number 2, or I should say temperature, like whether it's hot or cold. And then sometimes I find that actually really windy races, they dry me out a lot quicker. So I find myself drinking a lot of water.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So headlamps, we talked about whether or not we would even talk about this, because for a lot of sub ultra races, I would say almost all of them, you will probably never use a headlamp. Really the only time I use headlamps is if I'm training in the winter and it's, super early in the morning or late at night and I'm on the trails. So I don't really have anything to say on this, but I did find a good article, which we will link in the show notes if you are just looking for some headlamp advice.
Yeah. The only thing I have there is like, I found the headlamps that have like the extra strap on top are nice. You do have to kind of like mess with your hair if you're a girl, though. You either have to wear a low pony or like a weird side pony.
Do some space buns.
Yeah, space buns. But yeah, with sub ultras, I always kind of joke with my ultra friends being like, at least I don't have to wear a headlamp because my race starts at 8 a.m. That's it. That's one of the beauties of sub ultras is like, you never are waking up at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Unless you're like choosing to do like a Ragnar relay.
Yeah.
And then you're having to do a loop in the dark. But yeah, I would agree with Dani. If you can find a headlamp that has the strap on top, and also one that I find that if they're lower profile, like they're not very thick, that they tend to bounce less.
Yeah.
So read the article, it'll probably give you more information than we have at the moment. But I think that's all for like gear that
you're mostly going to come in contact with in sub ultra, so shorter races. And we kind of went by like in order. So now we are going to finish this up with an example of a mandatory list. And we are deciding to go over OCC, and we'll talk about a couple other races, but we're using OCC as kind of like the start point because this is the most gear that you will ever carry in like shorter races. And what's it called? Like we said at the beginning of our first couple episodes of this podcast, we're going to like tweak the rules a little bit because, technically OCC is not a sub ultra, but we just want to give like those shorter, like 50K races some loves too. And we would expect that a lot of you guys would be interested in this race as well. Do you want to start going through the list?
Yeah. So let's start off by saying that most races in the US don't even have mandatory gear. The only races that I've run in the US that have had mandatory gear is Pikes Peak. I don't know if you've experienced it anywhere else.
No, not that I can think of.
But Pikes Peak is literally just like they require you to have a water bottle and a jacket because like Dani was talking about earlier, once you get up high, like you're at 14,000 feet, it's going to be cold up there. Even if it's 70 degrees down low, it's probably going to be 50 degrees up high. So this is definitely more of a European thing.
Yeah. And also like we are specifically talking about shorter races. Like I'm sure there's 100-miler in like the Pacific Northwest where you have a mandatory gear list. Like I would expect Leadville 100 for sure.
Yeah. So I'll just list out what is required for you to carry for OCC and we can kind of go through it. So you have to have a running pack so that you can carry this obscene amount of things.
So that's your hydration vest.
Yeah, your hydration vest. You have to have a smartphone with like tracking. So a lot of people like to go to Europe and buy those little tiny block phones, but I think that races are starting to catch on, and I don't think you're allowed to do that anymore.
And I also heard that like this is kind of like a step to like validate results too, like in the future. That's kind of just like rumblings that this potentially like will track the runners to make sure that they're like staying on course and stuff.
Honestly, that's really nice because Dani and I have run a race where they give you a tracker. Like it was just for the elite athletes, but they put a tracker in our pack and we already had to take all of this stuff. And I was just like, I don't have room for an extra thing. Like I have my phone. So if I already have my phone, that would be even better. Personal beaker. So you have to a lot of races are cupless. So you have to be able to get water from an aid station on your own.
And that's the little collapsible cups. Yeah. You usually see them like they'll have like a little thumb hole. It's confusing because when I read this, I was like, what the heck? A beaker?
Yeah, because it says bottles and flasks are not accepted. So you have to have your bottle, and then you also have to have one of these little like cups. So you have to have at least 1 liter of water with you. 2 working torches, which is a headlamp. Oh, sorry. This one's not.
Oh, no, you're right. But it's 1
Okay.
torch for OCC.
Yeah, for OCC, it's only 1 torch. So OCC is a race that most people will finish during the daytime, but some people may not. And so it's one of the few races in this kind of category that you'll see that headlamps are required. A survival blanket, which are like those weird little like astronaut blankets that you see people putting on themselves after marathons. A whistle. A lot of packs will actually have whistles already on them when you buy them. So you may not even have to like purchase a whistle. A self-adhering elastic bandage, food reserve, 2 gels and 2 power bars. How would you, do you think that if you just have a bunch of gels, like, does that work? You've run the race before.
Yeah, so I think so. And yeah, based on like what everyone was carrying last year, and like even like the self-adhering elastic bandage, that actually had to be like one that was adhesive last year, which they got specific with. But yeah, I think if you have enough food, they'll be okay with that.
Yeah, it says recommendation of 800 kilocalories, which is just calories for those of you in the US. So I feel like most people are probably packing at least that for a 6-hour race anyhow. A jacket with a hood. I know a lot of the times they're really picky about the type of jacket too. Like they want it to be a Gore-Tex-like material. They want it to be windproof. Any other comments on the jacket?
Yeah, they check the seams. So the seams have to have like that layer of tape you see in Gore-Tex jackets. So this was something that like you literally had to pull out your jacket and they like checked it out. So you can't just have like a generic rain jacket for that.
Yeah. Long-legged trousers or race leggings, cap, bandana, or buff.
And
then your ID. So either a passport, or I'm assuming maybe, could you take your driver's license?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cause that seems way better than carrying your passport around. So those are the required items that you have to have for OCC. And that's quite a lot of things.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 13 items. One of them being what you'll carry your stuff in. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. So if you find yourself in this situation, maybe sometimes you'll see like professional athletes take a picture of their packs and themselves weighing their packs and trying to get them as light as possible. I will say, kind of like what EmKay said on a similar vein earlier, is like, this stuff isn't meant to be annoying. It's meant to keep you safe, and like it's supposed to prepare you for the worst case scenario. And like, while we are all out there and enjoying the outdoors, like, you know, sadly, there have been deaths in this sport because we are in exposed terrain where the weather can shift and stuff like that. And so for me, at least whenever I'm packing my pack and I'm just like, oh, I need to do another thing, it's just like, okay, I can't control what Mother Earth is going to do. And so like, yeah, there are many situations in the mountains where a rain jacket will be needed or extra food will be needed, where people will need to know my location and who I am. So yeah, whenever you find yourself getting frustrated, just know that like we normalize what we do, but we still are like putting ourselves out there in, you know, these conditions and stuff.
Yeah. My very first European race, and the only race that I have dropped out of so far, was I had to like have required gear for the first time in my life. And I was like, this is so dumb. Like, I don't need any of this. I'm only going to be out here for like 4 hours. And one of the things that I did is that I had to have a first aid kit, and I took some stuff out of it because it was just like annoying. I didn't have room for it. And then I rolled my ankle like really bad multiple times and had to walk back to an aid station. And the thing that I could have really, really used while I was walking back to this aid station and my ankle was getting all swollen was a compressive like wrap and Advil. And I took both of those things out and I did not have them. Fortunately, I packed all the mandatory clothes because it was raining and it was cold. And I walked for an hour and a half back to an aid station. Like, so it seems frustrating in the moment, but you're probably putting bad karma on yourself by not packing those things. So totally. I would suggest, and Dani and I were kind of talking about how sometimes they don't even check. And so you get it in your head that you're like, well, will they even check this? Like maybe I could get away with it. But for me, it's like, I just flew all the way to France to run this race. And if they do check me, I get a 30-minute time penalty, and I've flown all the way out here just to like do terribly because they added 30 minutes to my time. So
100%.
Just do it.
Yeah. That's a great story of needing your mandatory gear. I had somewhat of a similar experience in Scotland. I was there for the Skyrunning World Championships in 2019, I believe. And it was kind of an interesting scenario where like we didn't have like mandatory gear. It was kind of just like suggested gear. And I'm not saying like you need to take every recommended piece of gear, but we were running a VK. And so none of us were like, we're just running a VK. Why would we take a jacket? Like we're literally just running up this mountain and we'll be down in a jiff, right? And so as we're running up, this hailstorm comes in and it just turns wild where everyone starts getting crazy hypothermia because your only way back down in most VKs is to walk or run back down. And they were like throwing people in emergency blankets, and like my hands, like I lost motor control, and like my brain like started to hurt. Like it was, and my friend, like she like couldn't talk because we were all just so cold. So yeah, even with like the recommended gear, like again, looking at the weather and like what the conditions might be and guessing how long you're going to be out there. Like, okay, I don't need to take this jacket, but it might turn at 3 p.m. to 20 degrees. Like I probably should take it. Yeah.
Yeah. So moral of the story, just do what they ask.
Yeah. Just do what they ask. And there's like little tips and tricks where I feel it's not hindering your ability to utilize this in the worst case scenario. So for example, like your survival blanket, like you can always like refold it to make it much smaller, and it doesn't take away from the fact that it can still be utilized as a survival blanket. Your long leggings and trousers, like they now have these like pull-on pant leg things that some people put into their packs instead of like actual like full on second layer of pants, I guess you would say. And that's something where I'm like, that literally does the same thing. I'm down to do that to like lose a little bit of weight there. And then, just like jackets, there's some jackets that like fold really small instead of just like crunching it into your pack. So there's things you could do here and there that help with that.
Yeah. And so a lot of brands like make jackets specifically for these kinds of races. So, definitely look into that when you're thinking about buying like a waterproof or windproof jacket. Because I know that like Craft over the last couple of years has had to really work on that because it wasn't something that they had originally. And all of the athletes were like, hey, these jackets are too big. Like we need something smaller. And and we have a really good jacket now, but definitely like just look into that if you're ever thinking of running on any of these races and you don't have something like that already. Brands make them.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. But I will say for most races in the sub ultra distance, if there is mandatory gear, it's probably just going to be a water bottle and a jacket and maybe your phone.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, a lot of races require that you carry at least a little bit of water.
Yeah.
And great. A cup, because they don't want to use paper cups.
Beaker.
Yeah, they don't want to use paper cups at all the aid stations. So they like a lot of races are cupless. And so you will need some sort of bottle or little finger cup.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, we hope that kind of like touching on all these different areas of the gear you will most likely run into while venturing out on your first trail race or sub ultra will help. Obviously, we did not go into more ultra specifics. I would say there's even another layer of gear that goes into those longer races. But this is definitely more of just like getting you started in an intro to the sport.
Yeah. So if you feel like we've missed anything and you have any questions, like definitely feel free to slide into the SubHub DMs. If you're a Freetrail Pro member, you can ask us questions on the Slack and, we get notifications from that. So we'll answer pretty quickly. But yeah, I think that's probably it on our gear front. Dani, do you want to tell everybody about some races that are coming up this weekend that we will hopefully have some results for in coming weeks as well?
Definitely. So Desert Rats is happening out in Eastern Colorado, and that is part of the UTMB series. It is not a major. That is Canyons then the week after. So this race, the top three in the 50K, 100K, and 100 miler all get spots to OCC, CCC, and UTMB. So that's really exciting. We'll keep an eye on that. And then the first Sky Race is coming up as well. And that is the Calamoro Sky Race. So we'll be keeping tabs on that too.
And Boston Marathon Week.
Oh, and Boston.
by the time this episode comes out, it'll be Boston Marathon weekend, even though it's
weekend,
on Monday.
Yeah.
And we have our trail sweethearts, Dani Moreno and Ninka Brinkman racing. So hopefully we'll get to chat with them after the race, catch up, see how it went.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks again for listening. This is the SubHub podcast brought to you by Freetrail.